December 1943, northern Germany. The sky was iron gray, a vast ocean of cold and smoke. Somewhere in that sky, a B-17 Flying Fortress was dying. Its left engine was gone, the right wing shredded by flak. Hydraulic fluid streamed across the fuselage like blood from an open wound. Inside, 9 young men fought to keep her alive. They called her Ye Old Pub. At her controls, 21-year-old, Lieutenant Charlie Brown. It was his first mission over Germany. And it was already supposed to be his last. The mission had begun at dawn. They were bombing a factory in Bremen, a fortress city, surrounded by anti-aircraft guns and Luftwaffe bases. The crew joked during takeoff, pretending to be fearless. But by the time they reached the target, the jokes were gone. Flak shells tore through the air, black clouds blooming everywhere. Then came the fighters, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, cutting through the formation like wolves among sheep. The first burst of cannon fire hit the tail. The tail gunner screamed over the intercom. Then silence. He was dead before anyone could answer. Moments later, the nose was smashed, plexiglass shattered. The bombardier's face was covered in blood. Brown could feel the fortress shaking beneath him, every vibration echoing in his bones. They were losing altitude fast. "Hold her steady!" someone shouted. But steady wasn't an option anymore. The German fighters came again, 10, maybe 12. Each one diving, firing, disappearing into the clouds. The crew returned fire, but the 50 cals were freezing up, ammunition running low. Then a 20mm shell ripped through the fuselage and exploded inside. The oxygen system was gone. The radio was dead. Half the crew were unconscious or wounded. Brown's vision blurred. He could barely see through the frost on the glass. But somehow, through instinct or desperation, he kept the plane in the air. When they cleared Bremen, the fighters finally broke off. Silence except for the dying, hum of the engines, and the wind howling through the holes in the fuselage. They were alone, deep in enemy territory, barely a few thousand feet above the ground. Brown looked over his shoulder. His co-pilot was bleeding from the shoulder. The navigator's head rested against the bulkhead, motionless. Everywhere, smoke, cold, fear. He thought of the men behind him, the ones who were still breathing. He couldn't give up. He pushed the throttles forward. The fortress coughed, trembled, but kept flying. If he could just reach the North Sea, maybe they could make it home. Then out of the corner of his eye, movement. A shadow, fast, deliberate. Brown turned his head, and there it was, a Messerschmitt Bf-109. Its nose cannon pointed directly at them. The black cross on its fuselage, sharp against the pale winter sky. Inside, the German pilot, Franz Stiegler, tightened his grip on the stick. He had already scored 22 kills. One more, and he would earn the Knight's Cross. And right in front of him, the easiest kill of his life. The B-17 was barely holding together. One engine out. The tailgun destroyed. The crew, wounded, helpless. Stiegler lined up his sights. He could end it in a second, but then he hesitated. He pulled his Messerschmitt alongside the dying fortress, wingtip to wingtip, and gestured. He was telling them to turn east, to land and surrender. Brown shook his head. He wasn't going to land. They flew together across the German countryside. Stiegler gestured again, pointing north toward the sea. Brown didn't understand, but he kept flying. Over the North Sea, Stiegler saluted. Brown raised his hand in return. The German peeled away, disappearing into the clouds. The B-17 continued west. Charlie Brown never forgot that moment. The war didn't end when the shooting stopped. For many, it just changed shape. It became quiet, and silence for some was harder to survive than battle. For Charlie Brown, that silence began the moment his damaged B-17 touched down on English soil. He had done the impossible, brought his crew home. But no one wanted to hear how. When the debriefing began, Brown told his superior the truth, that a German fighter had spared them. The room fell silent. The officer stared at him, cold, skeptical. Then he leaned in and said, "Lieutenant, don't ever repeat that story again. Do you understand?" "Ever," Brown nodded. He understood all too well. Months later, Brown flew again, new missions, new crew. He became harder, quieter. But deep inside, the image of that German pilot never left him. Some nights he'd wake up sweating, dreaming that the Messerschmitt was back, hovering beside him. When the war finally ended in 1945, Charlie Brown went home to West Virginia, a small town, quiet streets, the smell of earth and gasoline. He had survived. But he no longer knew what to do with survival. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Franz Stigler returned to a defeated Germany. Berlin was rubble. The Reich had fallen. Those who survived carried ghosts. He wandered through ruins, his flight jacket still on, its insignia torn off. To most, he was just another pilot from a lost cause. He remembered the B-17, the faces inside, the young pilot who refused to surrender. He had risked his life to spare them. For years, Stigler worked odd jobs: mechanic, farmer, truck driver. In 1953, he immigrated to Canada. He opened a small aviation business in Vancouver, flew bush planes, trained young pilots, rebuilt engines from scrap. To students, he was just Franz, the German, calm, precise, with a strange sadness behind his eyes. For 40 years, both men lived on opposite sides of the world, bound by a secret neither could share, each convinced the other was long dead. In 1989, Braun, now in his 60s, sent a letter to a Luftwaffe Veterans Association in Germany. "I'm looking for the German pilot who spared the crew of a B-17. Over Germany in December, 9:43. Weeks passed. Then months, nothing. Until one afternoon, a letter arrived from Canada. Franz Stigler. Dear Charlie, I was the one. For 46 years, both men had lived with the same memory. And now, at last, it had found its way home. When Charlie and Franz met in 1990, they embraced. Every gunshot, every roar of engines, every heartbeat of fear, condensed into that single moment. The story slowly spread, first among veterans, then to the world. Books, documentaries, and interviews followed. It became a lesson in morality, courage, and humanity. For Braun, telling the story was relief and burden. For Stigler, people wanted to know why he had spared them. The answer was simple. I could not kill them. I saw men, not targets. Their friendship became legendary. They visited air shows, attended ceremonies, spoke honestly about the war. Young pilots and historians learned that valor is measured by choices, not kills. Charlie recalled the day over Germany. We expected to die. Every man in that fortress expected to die. And yet he didn't pull the trigger. That act saved us and showed what humanity looks like, even in war. Franz added, "It was not heroism. It was a choice. Do not kill when you can." That choice has stayed with me longer than any medal. Their story inspired generations. History books included it. Documentaries showcased it. Educators taught it in ethics lessons. Yet neither man sought fame. Their legacy was quiet, that mercy is possible even when the world demands cruelty. They revisited northern skies, pointing to the clouds where the B-17 limped through enemy territory. When Stigler passed in 2008, Charlie was there. He followed a year later. Two men, once enemies, now brothers in life and death. The world remembers battles, strategies, victories. But sometimes, the smallest choices, not recorded in logs, leave the deepest marks. Franz chose mercy. Charlie carried that mercy forward. Together, they showed the world that enemies can become brothers. Their legacy, a single act of humanity in the midst of horror, endures.